Over the next several weeks, we'll be looking at passages from the Sermon on the Mount, beginning in Matthew 5. We will today begin the first of what will be several sermons on this important portion of the Scriptures. One might call the Sermon on the Mount the manual for discipleship, and it is the longest and most detailed expression from Jesus himself of his ethical and moral teachings. But let's take a look at this passage, which comes at fairly early in the Sermon on the Mount. We're going to be skipping over the Beatitudes, not because they're not important, but just simply for time's sake, and begin in chapter 5, verse 13 of the Sermon on the Mount, verses 13 through 20. You are like salt for the whole human race. But if salt loses its saltiness, there is no way to make it salty again. It has become worthless, so it is thrown out and people trample on it. You are like light for the whole world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one lights a lamp and puts it under a bowl. Instead, it is put on the lampstand, where it gives light for everyone in the house. In the same way, your light must shine before people, so they will see the good things you do and praise your Father in heaven. Do not think that I have come to do away with the law of Moses and the teaching of the prophets. I have not come to do away with them, but to make their teachings come true. Remember that as long as heaven and earth last, not the least point nor the smallest detail of the law will be done away with, not until the end of all things. So then, whoever disobeys even the least important of the commandments and teaches others to do the same will be least in the kingdom of heaven. On the other hand, whoever obeys the law and teaches others to do the same will be great in the kingdom of heaven. I tell you then, that you will be able to enter the kingdom of heaven only if you are more faithful than the teachers of the law and the Pharisees in doing what God requires. May God add a blessing to the reading and hearing of the word. Well, like I said, we're going to be taking a look at some of the portions of the Sermon on the Mount over the next couple of weeks, or several weeks, and on up into the beginning of Lent. And today, in this particular passage, we hear a challenging word from the Lord Jesus. And it is a word that I'm actually going to use a slightly different translation, the translation that most of us have grown up with this passage where in Jesus talks about us being salt and light in the world. More specifically, where the passage we just read from our Pew Bible says, you are like salt for the earth, or you are like the light for the world. We're going to just simply skip the like, even though these are indeed metaphors, and simply follow the more traditional translation. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. And these are challenging words for us from Jesus, because what they're saying to us is that whether we like it or not, we are the salt of the earth. Whether we like it or not, we are the light of the world. And so whether we like it or not, when we do something, we are showing some sort of light. It might be a good and kindly light. It might be a stabbing, blinding sort of light. And when we do something, we are seasoning the world with the salt of the earth. We'll talk a little bit more about what all this means, but it might be that we put too little or just enough, or the worst of all, way too much. And we'll share a little bit about all of that in a minute. Now, as I say, this passage comes near the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus is passing on the most important principles of his teachings to his disciples. And this is what he tells them very early in the sermon. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. And what he told the disciples on the mountain with him, of course, applies to those of us who would like to consider ourselves to be disciples of Jesus, or at least on the road to being disciples. We too are the salt of the earth and the light of the world. Now, what we need to notice is that Jesus is not using, in this instance, what we might call aspirational language. By that I mean, he is not saying you should be the light of the world, or you should be working to become the salt of the earth, right? We're so used to things that we have to kind of aim for and aspire to, but that's not what Jesus is saying in this instant. He says, whether you like it or not, you already are these things. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. There's nothing to aspire to. There's only something to live into. There's nothing future about this. Now go out there and live that out. So then, what is it all about? What does it mean when Jesus says we are the salt of the earth and the light of the world? Well, let's start by thinking a little bit about salt. Salt is really an amazing mineral, isn't it? It has all sorts of uses. It enhances flavor. It melts the ice in our frozen steps and our frozen roads. Especially back in the old days, before they did stuff to stop this from happening, it ate away our cars. Remember that? It can be corrosive. It can be delicious. Now, that's from our contemporary perspective, and we need to keep that in mind because all that's true. But we also need to look at it from the point of view of how Jesus' hearers would have heard it, because back in those days, salt was not only all of those things that we talk about, but it was even more. It was incredibly important and valuable. It was hard to come by, first of all. And secondly, it was something that, because of its importance and its rareness, was incredibly valuable. There were times in the ancient world where salt was worth its weight in gold because of its importance. And the word, and it also was sometimes used for that reason as a currency, that people would pay for things in salt. And in fact, our word salary comes from paying a worker with salt. And it's why we sometimes say that someone is worth their salt. Part of what made salt so valuable was the role that salt played in preserving food. Because, of course, in Jesus' time and place, and for many other times and places, there were no such thing as refrigerators and that sort of thing. And particularly in the climate that Jesus and his hearers were living, where it was so warm most of the time, it was much more of an issue for preserving food, because the food would begin to go bad much more quickly than it does here in our part of the world. And salt was the only way that they knew of to preserve food and keep it from going bad before too long. So when Jesus told his disciples, you are the salt of the earth, how they heard it and how we need to hear it was, he was saying, you are of incredible value. You are important. And in fact, you are essential. Get shaking little grains of salt because God is counting on you to keep the earth from going bad. If it isn't for you, the world is going to start stinking very shortly. So that's perhaps a little bit about what Jesus is talking when he says you are the salt of the earth. But let's think about light, which of course we understand perhaps a little bit better in the same way that the folks were hearing it from Jesus than salt. But nonetheless, we have to remember that in our world, where we have become accustomed to being able to turn on a switch and then the light comes on, we probably take light more for granted than the folks of Jesus' time. It was even more difficult or it was rather difficult, I should say, to light a home than we experience it today. Now, for us, maybe about the only times that we really experienced what was sort of normal for folks in those times is when a winter storm takes our power out, and if we don't have a generator in particular, we're left to do things the way that they've always done it with things like candles and of course flashlights, which they didn't have, but they did have torches. Now and then, some of us 21st century Americans even find ourselves in the situation I was sharing with the children about being in complete and utter darkness. And in those times, we may discover even more how important light is and how disorienting darkness can be. I still remember vividly a time some 40 years ago when my family and I were invited to stay at a friend's cabin up at a lake in Wisconsin. So the first challenge, we arrived and made ourselves comfortable, but didn't spend much time indoors because the lake was beckoning. But for some reason, when night came, I stayed out much later than everybody else. And when I got back to the cabin, inside it was pitch black. And I didn't want to wake anyone, so I didn't turn on the lights. And I figured, well, surely it couldn't be too hard to find my room up in this small cabin, which actually was on the second floor. Once I got started, I found out how wrong I was. The room where I was staying, as I said, was on the second floor, and to get up to the second floor, one had to climb a spiral staircase. And so the first challenge was to find the staircase in the complete darkness without killing myself and tripping over chairs and sofas in the darkness in this unfamiliar surroundings. And after some time, I did finally find the staircase and began to climb up. But that was not anywhere near, the climbing up this spiral staircase was not anywhere near as simple as I thought it would be, because I was already disoriented from having to traverse through the darkness to find the staircase, and the twisting and the turning of the spiral staircase, which seemed endless, only made me even more disoriented. And by the time I finally reached the top of the stairs, I was so completely flummoxed as far as where I was and which direction I needed to turn to go anywhere. And to make matters worse, there were 2 or 3 bedrooms on that floor, and I wasn't sure which one was mine. And I was afraid that I might finally find a door, go in there, and try to get in bed, and who knows whose bed I was going to get in. I didn't know where any lights were, switches, and plus I was worried that if I spent too much time walking back and forth, I would eventually fall down the spiral staircase. I don't know how, but I did find my room and find my bed. But I will never forget how quickly and thoroughly I became confused in the absence of any light whatsoever. So light is really, really important, even though we tend to take it for granted. Really important. Maybe even more important than salt. It orients, it guides, it makes things visible. It enables us to safely and securely navigate the world we live in. And that's who we are as disciples, says Jesus. You are the light of the world. You are important and, in fact, essential. So get shining, my little lights, because God is counting on you to help people safely find their way. And whether we like it or not, we are the lights of the world. It comes with being made in the image of God. Even more, it comes with being a follower of Jesus, given the gift of the Holy Spirit. You can't not be these things. But that doesn't settle it, of course. There is still the matter, as Jesus explains, of what sort of salt and what sort of light and how we use that salt and that light. Because as important as salt and light are, they need to be regulated. You can have too much of both of them. Too much salt and it becomes caustic and in fact sickening. I learned that when I was in the Holy Land a year ago and had the opportunity to swim in the Dead Sea. Any of you swum in the Dead Sea besides me? If you get down to the Holy Land, you should do it. And of course, the Dead Sea is one of the saltiest bodies of water on earth. It has 10 times the salinity of the ocean, if you can imagine that. And it's a lot of fun swimming in because, of course, being so salty, you just float right up to the top. In fact, the flotation is so extreme that I found when I finally decided I wanted to go back in, I had to really work hard to get my legs down to walk along the bottom of the sea and walk towards the shore. Now, we had been warned that if you're going to go swimming, you want to make sure you don't swallow any of this water. And I did a pretty good job of that, but at a certain point, as I was floating there in the sea, of the Dead Sea, a little bit of water just washed over my mouth, and I tasted a little bit. And oh, man, I have never tasted anything so strong and so horrible. I felt like I was going to get sick right then and there. And then when that passed, I knew I was going to get sick from the little bit that I had, that a little later on it was going to come back and revisit. But thankfully that didn't happen. But if I had swallowed a whole lot more, it would have. So and of course, light can be that same way. If there's too much of it and it's shined too directly in our eyes, it actually makes it more difficult to see and has the opposite effect that is of what is intended. And so it is sometimes with some of us disciples of Jesus. We are sometimes too much salt and too much light. We have all encountered people who, while well-meaning, give Jesus a bad name by their well-meaning but obnoxious, judgmental, holier-than-thou approach to being salt and light. And while that's true, I at the same time suspect that that's probably not the problem for most of us timid Methodists in the room. For us, the problem is more a matter of timidity and uncertainty and fear of offending, or as Jesus would put it, too much putting our light under a bushel. So then, friends, what sort of salt and light will you be? Because what we learn from Jesus is that we are essential. That's not to give us a delusion of grandeur or anything like that, but just simply to say that our role in the world is important, and we should never underestimate how even the smallest things that we do contribute to the work that God has called us to do. And at the same time, never underestimate how our failure to do even the small things is a betrayal of what we are called to do and be. And that our overzealous attempts to sometimes give God a hand where God doesn't need a hand can actually have the opposite effect, where salt gets corrosive and light gets blinding. But even those small things that we do or fail to do, either being kind to the clerk at the grocery store or being unkind, as sometimes we have done when we've been running late or under stress. Visiting those who are shut in and who might otherwise feel forgotten. Being just simply a faithful husband or wife. Being a loving parent or grandparent. All of these are essential and important things that we, as the light of the world and the salt of the earth, are expected to be, not just do, but be. So like I said, little salt grains get shaky. And little lights, let's start to shine. For that is who we are.